Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Echoes of the Night. I hope you're all settled in, wherever you're listening from, whether it's the quiet of your living room or the calm of your bedroom. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to hit that like button, and if you're new, be sure to subscribe for more unsettling tales. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I love hearing from all of you. Now let's dive into tonight's story, one that starts as casually as a late-night pizza order. It was a regular Friday night, one of those evenings where the whole world seems to be unwinding after a long week. The kind of night where the usual humdrum of the workday fades away, leaving nothing but comfort and relaxation in its wake. I had just finished a late shift at the office and was looking forward to a simple, satisfying meal. I didn't feel like cooking, and frankly, I deserved a break. Pizza was the obvious choice. I grabbed my phone and dialed my usual spot, the pizzeria that had been around for years. The same friendly voice greeted me on the other end of the line. I ordered my usual, a large pepperoni pizza with extra cheese. Nothing fancy, just the perfect comfort food after a long week. The delivery was quick, as usual. The doorbell rang and there it was. The smell of freshly baked dough and sizzling cheese wafting through the air as I opened the door to retrieve my dinner. The delivery guy, a young man with a friendly smile, handed me the box. I paid him, gave a small tip, and closed the door behind him. For a moment I just stood there, savoring the smell. There's something special about that first whiff of pizza, isn't there? It's like the world slows down for a second, and all your worries are forgotten. I set the box down on the kitchen counter and opened it, eager to indulge in my much-needed feast. But as I peered inside, something didn't feel right. The pizza was off. It wasn't the usual neat arrangement of pepperoni slices scattered across the cheese. This time, there were odd gaps in the topping, strange irregularities in the pattern. I frowned. Maybe it was just a mistake, a little mess-up on their part. I shrugged it off, figuring it didn't matter much. I took a slice and sat down at the kitchen table, ready to enjoy the quiet of the evening. But as I bit into the first slice, I felt a chill run down my spine. The cheese was colder than I expected, the crust slightly soggy, and there was a faint taste. A metallic, almost bitter aftertaste that lingered in my mouth. I quickly swallowed, pushing the odd sensation aside. Maybe the pizza had just cooled down too quickly on the way over. It was still edible, still pizza, after all. But as I looked at the remaining slices, my eyes fell on something that made my stomach drop. Domestic trash. One of the slices was missing. Not a bite taken out of it, not a piece left behind. It was simply gone, as if it had never existed in the first place. Yakla. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again, but the slice was definitely gone. In its place was a small, uneven space, as though the pizza had been cut in a way that didn't make sense. I leaned closer, my mind racing to make sense of it. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, or the way the pizza was arranged in the box. But something in my gut told me that wasn't the case. I stood up and walked around the kitchen, trying to shake off the creeping unease that had settled in. It was just a pizza, right? Just a silly mistake, nothing to worry about. But then I heard something I'd forgot about. A faint scraping noise, like the sound of something being dragged across the floor. It was distant, almost imperceptible, but it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I froze, my heart racing. I waited for a moment, straining to hear it again. But the house was silent. Maybe it was just the wind or my imagination playing tricks on me. I tried to calm myself down, but the unease wouldn't go away. The wind traffic outside rasping, and my arms starting to tire as I slept tonight. I returned to the pizza box and stared at it. The slice that was missing. Where could it have gone? I had been alone when I opened the door, alone when I unpacked the pizza. There was no one else here. She had gone with no one else moments before. The scraping noise came again, this time louder, more distinct. I stepped away from the counter, my eyes darting around the kitchen. The sound seemed to be coming from the hallway. I couldn't tell where exactly, but it was close. Too close. I glanced at the door, still locked, the same way I had left it earlier. My pulse quickened. Was someone in the house? My heart raced as I strained to listen for any further sounds, any clues that might explain what was happening. "Are you okay?" I asked. And there was nothing. The kitchen was still, and the only thing I could hear was the quiet hum of the refrigerator. But that scraping sound, why couldn't I shake it? I stood frozen for a long moment, my eyes locked on the hallway. Slowly, I stepped toward it, my hand reaching for the light switch. And that's when I saw it. A shadow moving across the floor, too fast for my eyes to track. It flickered and vanished, like it had never been there at all. I backed away, my breath quickening. Was I losing my mind? Was it just the pizza playing tricks on me? Or was something else at work here? The shadow I had seen in the hallway was gone before I could make sense of it. My pulse still hammered in my ears, but the house remained eerily quiet. I had to be imagining things, right? Shadows could play tricks on you, especially when you're tired, and with everything that had been happening in my life recently. Long hours at work, the constant stress. I wouldn't be surprised if my mind was just playing games with me. But as I stood there, frozen in place, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the missing slice of pizza. It was the way the air felt, thick and still, like the whole house was holding its breath. The temperature had dropped, too. The warmth from the oven had long since dissipated, leaving behind a chill that settled into my bones. I stepped into the hallway, trying to calm myself. The scraping sound had stopped, but my nerves were still on edge. I walked slowly, one foot after the other, my eyes darting around the dark corners of the house. The hallway stretched before me, the dim light from the kitchen casting long shadows along the walls. It felt as though the darkness was swallowing the space around me. I paused at the living room entrance, peering into the dimly lit room. Nothing. The furniture was exactly where I'd left it, the TV remote still on the couch, a book lying open on the coffee table. Everything looked normal. But then, just as I was about to turn back, something caught my eye. On the floor near the door, half hidden behind the edge of the couch, was something that didn't belong. A small, crumpled piece of paper. I walked over, my heart racing, and knelt down to pick it up. The paper was old, yellowed with age, and it had a strange, musty smell to it, as though it had been tucked away for years. There was something written on it, but the handwriting was faint, almost faded beyond recognition. I squinted at the words, trying to make them out. "The slice is gone. You shouldn't have taken it. They'll come for you now." My breath caught in my throat. The words felt wrong, like a warning from someone or something that had been here long before I ever moved into this house. I stood up, holding the paper in my trembling hand. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing in, suffocating. The feeling of unease was unbearable now. It was no longer just a simple mistake or a trick of the light. Something was happening, something I couldn't explain. I walked back to the kitchen, trying to steady my breathing. I had to figure out what was going on. I had to make sense of the missing slice, the shadow, and the cryptic note. My mind raced with possibilities, but none of them seemed to offer any comfort. I reached the counter and stared at the pizza box. The missing slice still wasn't there, but the remaining pieces seemed to be arranged in a way that didn't make sense. They weren't aligned the way they should have been. It was almost as if they had been moved. I ran my fingers over the surface of the box, my skin tingling. I knew I had left it just like this when I first opened it. But now, it felt wrong. The pizza wasn't just cold, it felt unnatural, as though it had been here far longer than it should have. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of confusion in my mind. Maybe I was just tired, maybe I was overthinking it, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The doorbell rang again, its sharp sound cutting through the silence of the house. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Who could it be at this hour? I hadn't ordered anything else. Hesitant, I walked toward the door. My hand hovered over the handle for a moment, and then I pulled it open. Standing there, in the dim light of the porch, was the delivery guy from earlier. His smile was gone, replaced by an odd, unsettling look on his face. His eyes were wide, too wide, and his skin was pale, almost ghostly. He held out a new pizza box, the lid closed tightly. I blinked, confused. What's going on? I didn't order another pizza. The delivery guy didn't say anything. He just stood there, his eyes never leaving mine, the box held out toward me. His silence was more unnerving than any words could have been. "Are you going to take it?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Ran swallowed, my throat dry. Something about his voice sent a shiver down my spine, but I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid. I reached out, my fingers brushing the edge of the box. It felt unnaturally cold in my hands, colder than it should have been. As soon as I took the box, the delivery guy turned and walked away without a word, disappearing into the night. I watched him go, my mind spinning, unsure of what to do next. The whole encounter felt off, like I was caught in a dream I couldn't wake up from. I closed the door slowly, still holding the pizza box. My mind raced with questions. Why had he brought me another pizza? Was it a mistake, or was it something else entirely? I placed the box on the kitchen counter and opened it, half expecting to find something strange inside. But this time, the pizza looked normal. The pepperoni was perfectly arranged, the cheese golden and bubbly. Except for one thing. In the center of the pizza, there was a single slice missing. It was missing because Matthew had thrown it. I stared at the pizza, the missing slice taunting me with its emptiness. I couldn't bring myself to take a bite, despite the rumbling in my stomach. Something about this felt wrong. Too wrong. The chill that had settled in the house seemed to grow colder, like the walls themselves were closing in. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on me, the quiet broken only by the sound of my own breath. I glanced at the clock on the wall. Midnight. The night had grown deep, and with it, my sense of unease. I had to figure this out, I told myself. I couldn't just ignore what was happening. But every time I tried to make sense of it, the pieces didn't fit. The missing slice, the strange delivery, the eerie note. It all seemed connected, but in a way I couldn't comprehend. I stood there for a moment trying to shake off the growing feeling that I was being watched. It was subtle, like a shadow just out of the corner of my eye, but I couldn't shake the sensation that something or someone was lurking just beyond my reach. The air in the kitchen felt thick, oppressive, as though the space itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, trying to steady my nerves. When I opened them again, I could have sworn the pizza had shifted slightly. The remaining slices were arranged differently, almost as if they had moved of their own accord. My heart skipped a beat. I reached out to touch the pizza, but before I could, I heard a sound from the hallway. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible. A scraping noise, like something dragging across the floor. My body tensed, my fingers frozen just above the pizza box. I wasn't alone. I turned toward the sound, my eyes darting to the dark hallway that stretched out behind me. The scraping noise grew louder, closer, as if something was slowly moving toward me, dragging itself across the floor. My breath quickened, and my skin prickled with a cold sweat. The house, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a prison, and I was trapped inside with whatever was making that noise. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. The scraping continued, growing louder with each passing second. My mind raced. Should I go investigate? Or should I hide, lock myself away from whatever was coming? Before I could make a decision, the scraping stopped, and an unsettling silence fell over the house. My body tensed, my senses heightened, waiting for the next sound, the next movement. But nothing came. "What have you avoided?" Lee turned back to the pizza, my mind spinning. What was going on? Why did everything feel so off? I couldn't explain it, but the air was thick with an energy I couldn't place. The pizza in front of me seemed to mock me now, its warm, inviting aroma somehow unsettling in the current atmosphere. The missing slice was a constant reminder that something wasn't right. I heard it again. This time, it was a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, as though someone was speaking directly into my ear. But there was no one there. "You shouldn't have taken it," the voice murmured, so faint I could barely hear it. I froze, my blood running cold. My eyes scanned the kitchen, but there was no one in sight. The voice didn't belong to anyone I knew. It wasn't the delivery guy, or anyone I'd ever heard before. It was something else. Something ancient. The kind of voice that echoed in the back of your mind, one that whispered in the darkest corners of your thoughts. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to leave the kitchen. I couldn't stand it anymore. Couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that I couldn't control. I shrugged, but as I turned to leave, I heard the scraping again, this time right behind me. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't need to look to know that whatever it was closer than ever. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest, my eyes wild with fear. But there was nothing there. The kitchen was empty, the silence suffocating. Yet the air felt alive, thick with an unseen presence that I couldn't escape. Collapse, I glanced back at the pizza, the missing slice still mocking me. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I needed to understand why this was happening. But as I reached for the pizza box, the doorbell rang again. I froze. This time the sound was different. The tone was sharp, urgent, and somehow more insistent. It echoed through the house, louder than before, vibrating in my chest. Who could it be now? What did they want? I walked to the door, my hands trembling as I reached for the handle. My mind was a blur of thoughts, trying to make sense of everything. The pizza, the strange delivery, the voice in my ear. It was all connected, I was sure of it. When I opened the door, the delivery guy was standing there once again, but this time there was no smile on his face. His eyes were wide with fear, his body tense as though he was about to run. He didn't hold out another pizza box this time. Instead, he stepped forward, his voice barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have eaten the pizza," he said, his words urgent and filled with dread. I took a step back, my mind racing. "What do you mean? What's going on? Who are you?" But before he could answer, the sound of scraping returned, louder than ever, and the man turned to face the darkness behind him, his face twisted in terror, his eyes locked on something I couldn't see. "You're not safe," he whispered, his voice shaking. "They're coming for you." The two men fled, and then, before I could react, he was gone, disappearing into the night as quickly as he had appeared. The doors slammed shut behind me, and I was left standing there, my heart racing, the sound of scraping filling the air once more. Bah! I stood frozen in the doorway, the faintest remnants of the delivery guy's hurried departure still lingering in the air. His words echoed in my mind. "They're coming for you." I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the veil of reality, waiting for me to make a move, waiting for me to cross some invisible line. I slowly backed away from the door, my mind racing. Who was that guy? What did he know? And what was coming for me? "Jim Tennant," he began. I turned back into the house, the silence inside feeling oppressive. The scraping sound had stopped, but the air felt thick, charged with a strange energy. Every corner of the room seemed to hide something just out of sight, as if the shadows themselves were shifting, watching, waiting. I shook my head, trying to clear the thoughts clouding my mind. I needed to calm down. There had to be a rational explanation for all of this. The pizza, the strange delivery, the missing slice. It was all just coincidence, right? But then I remembered the voice, that whisper in my ear. You shouldn't have taken it. And the way the pizza had shifted on the counter, as if something had moved it without my touch. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, had only grown stronger since the moment I opened that pizza box. I felt my chest tighten, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. I wasn't alone. I could feel it now, the presence in the room, just beyond my line of sight. It wasn't something I could touch or see, but it was there, lurking in the periphery of my senses. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each passing second like a countdown, a reminder that time was running out. I glanced around the kitchen, my eyes falling on the pizza box, still sitting on the counter. The pizza, once warm and inviting, now seemed grotesque, its cheesy surface glistening in the dim light. I hadn't even touched it since the delivery guy had left, but somehow it felt like it had changed. The air around it felt charged, as if it was pulsing with something unnatural. I reached out slowly, my hand trembling as I grasped the edge of the box. My fingers brushed against the cardboard, and I immediately recoiled, as though I had touched something that wasn't meant to be touched. The coldness that radiated from the box sent a shiver down my spine. I stood there, unsure of what to do next. The unease in my gut had only grown since the delivery, and every instinct I had screamed at me to get out of the house, to leave everything behind and run. But where would I go? What could I do? The delivery guy's warning had rattled me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was drawing closer, that I was being pulled into something much larger than myself. I swear I was doing it for her, and then nothing for myself. I looked down at the pizza once more, my mind trying to make sense of the strange events. It was just a pizza, right? A simple meal. But nothing about this night felt simple anymore. It felt like the pizza had become a symbol, a key to something darker, something I wasn't ready to face. A soft noise caught my attention, drawing me away from the pizza. It was a faint, rhythmic tapping sound, coming from the hallway. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I hadn't heard anyone enter the house, and the sound was too deliberate to be a random noise. How hard could it be, that small sound? The tapping grew louder, closer, until it was right outside the kitchen door. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly turned toward the sound. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure. It was the delivery guy. But this time, something was different. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. His clothes were the same, but there was a distinct air of unease about him, as if he were caught between two worlds. He didn't speak at first, just stood there in the doorway, staring at me with a look of desperate fear. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice shaking. I took a tentative step toward him, but he didn't move. "How unfortunate that you can't leave your house right now," he said. He finally spoke, his voice hoarse and trembling. "It's not just the pizza. It's what's inside of it. What you took." He paused, his eyes darting nervously around the room as if searching for something in the shadows. It's not just food, it's something else. Something that was never meant to be eaten." I felt a cold chill spread through me as his words sank in. Something else? What was he talking about? He took a step forward, his hands trembling. "I shouldn't have come back. I shouldn't have warned you, but I couldn't let it happen again. You need to leave. Get out of here, before it's too late." I opened my mouth to ask him what he meant, but before I could speak, a strange, high-pitched ringing filled the room. It was like a phone vibrating on the edge of hearing, a sound that made my teeth ache and my head spin. I clutched my ears, trying to block out the noise, but it only grew louder. The delivery guy's eyes widened in horror, and he turned to face the hallway, his body shaking uncontrollably. It's here! It's here! It's coming for you!" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the ringing. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The room was plunged back into silence, but the air felt thick, oppressive, like the calm before a storm. I looked around, my eyes scanning every corner of the kitchen, but there was nothing there. No sign of whatever had caused the ringing, no sign of any danger. But I could feel it. It was real. Whatever was coming, it was closer now. The delivery guy was gone. I was alone. The room was still, unnervingly so. The ringing that had filled the air moments before was gone, leaving only an unsettling silence. I stood there, in the dim light of the kitchen, staring at the door through which the delivery guy had just disappeared. The cold air seemed to grow heavier around me, as though the house itself were holding its breath. I tried to gather my thoughts, but my mind was racing, too many questions colliding at once. What had just happened? What did the delivery guy mean when he said it wasn't just the pizza? What had he meant by, "It's coming for you"? I turned slowly back to the pizza box on the counter, as though it were some kind of sign, something I could decipher. The pizza was still there, untouched, the cheese glistening under the flickering light of the kitchen. It didn't look any different, but somehow it felt wrong. I approached the counter slowly, my steps hesitant, like I was walking toward a trap. The room felt colder now, as though the shadows had grown deeper. My eyes fell on the last remaining slice of pizza, the one I hadn't yet eaten, the one that seemed to have caused all this. I reached out for it, my fingers trembling as I lifted the slice from the box. The moment it touched my hand, a strange sensation shot up my arm, like an electric shock. My heart skipped a beat. I pulled my hand back instinctively, but the pizza didn't fall. It was as though it was attached to me, like a weight, a pull I couldn't explain. I stared at the slice, the warm aroma of cheese and tomato now completely absent. It was replaced by something darker, something sour. I felt nauseous just holding it. The slice seemed to pulse in my hand, like it was alive, and I had to fight the urge to drop it and run. I had to find out who was hunting her, take her money, poison her food, consume her, kill her. Suddenly the doorbell rang again, breaking the oppressive silence. I flinched, the sound cutting through the air like a knife. I turned toward the door, my heart racing. Who could it be this time? I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to open the door to whatever nightmare was unfolding outside. But the curiosity, the fear, it was too much. I had to know. I had to understand what was happening. Why this pizza? Why me? I walked to the door, each step feeling like I was wading through thick mud. My hand hovered over the doorknob, the slice of pizza still in my other hand, its weight pulling me down. I took a deep breath, then opened the door. The street outside was dark, empty. No sign of anyone, no movement, just the stillness of the night. But then I saw it. Just a few feet away, sitting on the porch, was another pizza box. I stepped forward cautiously, my pulse quickening. This couldn't be happening again. Another pizza? But who was delivering it? I hadn't ordered anything. I bent down and reached for the box, my hands shaking as I lifted it. The cardboard felt unnaturally cold against my skin. I opened it, expecting to see another piece of the puzzle. But instead, my stomach lurched as I stared at the contents. It wasn't a pizza at all. Inside the box was a single rotting tomato, its skin cracked and oozing black liquid. Beside it was a note, written in a jagged, almost frantic scrawl. "You took it. Now you will never be free." My blood ran cold as I read the words. What did this mean? Was this some kind of twisted game? I felt the weight of the pizza slice in my hand again, its presence like a constant reminder that I was trapped in something far beyond my understanding. On the fourth ring, the sound of stopping. I slammed the box shut, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The house felt even colder now, and the shadows seemed to be closing in around me. The fear I had been trying to push aside came rushing back, overwhelming me. I had to get out. I had to leave this place before whatever was happening consumed me completely. But as I turned to head back inside, the front door slammed shut behind me with a force that made the walls shake. I spun around, heart racing, but there was no one there. No sound, no movement, just the heavy, oppressive silence. I pressed my back against the door, feeling a cold sweat bead on my forehead. I could hear the faintest whispering now, a soft, unintelligible murmur that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. The shadows around me flickered as if they were alive, shifting and swirling. I glanced at the pizza slice in my hand. My fingers were still tightly gripping it, and yet it felt like it was slipping away from me, as though it no longer belonged to me. The weight of it had become unbearable. And then I heard it. A soft, wet slither from behind me. I spun around, my heart in my throat. The kitchen window was open, and through it I saw something moving. Something that shouldn't have been there. I took a step forward, but my body froze. The figure that had appeared in the window wasn't human. It was tall, impossibly tall, its shape shifting in and out of focus, as if it were made of the very shadows themselves. It had no face, only darkness, but I could feel its eyes on me. Cold, empty eyes. It moved closer, and the temperature dropped even further. I could see the fog of my breath in the air now, feel the chill seeping into my bones. And then just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. The shadows seemed to retreat, and the air in the room grew warmer, but I knew that it wasn't over. Whatever this was, whatever had started with that pizza, it wasn't finished. And it wouldn't be until I had taken the last bite. The room was thick with the stench of fear, a tangible weight pressing down on my chest. The shadows, though they had retreated, still clung to the corners of the room, whispering softly, just out of reach. The figure in the window was gone, but I knew deep down that it wasn't truly finished. This nightmare was far from over. Half the time I reconsidered spending my last 5 minutes with the person that I was trying to become. Worse and worse. I turned back to the pizza box, the one that had started all of this. The last slice sat there, taunting me, as though it had a life of its own. My hand still held the slice I had picked up earlier, its greasy surface slick against my palm. It was cold now, no longer warm like it had been when it arrived. But it was still there, still calling to me. I couldn't explain why I was still holding it, why I hadn't thrown it away, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The thought of discarding it felt like a betrayal, like I was leaving something unfinished, something important. I finally stood up, my misery clouding over my mind half the time. But the more I stared at it, the more I felt its weight, its pull. It was like a chain binding me to something I didn't understand. The air around me thickened, and the whispers grew louder, their words just beyond comprehension. I felt them clawing at my mind, urging me to take the final bite. I had no choice, I realized. If I didn't finish it, if I didn't consume that last slice, whatever was happening would never end. I had to finish what had been started. I walked slowly to the table, my legs shaky, my body moving almost mechanically. The pizza slice felt heavier with each step, its presence a constant reminder of the dark force I was dealing with. I sat down at the table, staring at the slice, the last piece of the puzzle, the last piece of me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the room was spinning. The shadows flickered again, as if they were waiting, watching, eager for me to make my move. I brought the slice to my lips, and as I did, the temperature dropped even further. I could see my breath now, misting in front of me. My heart pounded in my chest, the fear almost suffocating. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. With trembling hands, I took the first bite. The moment the pizza touched my tongue, something inside me shifted. The taste wasn't the familiar warmth of cheese and tomato. It was bitter, sour, almost rotten. It burned as it slid down my throat, a sickly heat spreading through my chest. The room around me began to distort, the walls warping, bending as if they were made of rubber. I swallowed, but the taste lingered, clinging to the back of my throat like poison. I tried to push it down, but the more I ate, the worse it became. The shadows grew stronger, swirling around me, and I could hear them now. Voices, countless voices, whispering my name, calling to me. I forced myself to take another bite, then another, each one more difficult than the last. The whispers grew louder, and the temperature dropped further until I could see my breath in thick clouds, like fog. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing together, the floor beneath my feet shifting. And then, just as I was about to take the final bite, everything stopped. The room was still. The shadows, the whispers, the cold, all of it vanished in an instant. I sat there, frozen, my body trembling from the sudden change. The pizza was gone. The box was empty. I felt a sense of relief, but it was fleeting. The air was still, too still. My pulse was racing, but the weight of the darkness had lifted. I stood up, slowly, unsure of what had just happened. The shadows had retreated, but I knew they weren't gone for good. The doorbell rang again, sharp and sudden. I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. I turned toward the door, my mind a blur, but I couldn't stop myself from walking toward it. I opened the door cautiously, my hand shaking as I turned the knob. There, standing in the doorway, was the delivery guy, his face as pale and expressionless as before. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't malice. It was pity. "You finished it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Now it's over." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I watched him go, my heart still racing, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. I closed the door, the silence now deafening. I stood there for a moment, my hand on the knob, trying to steady myself. The shadows had vanished. The whispers were gone. The pizza was gone, but I knew, deep down, that the nightmare wasn't over. It had changed me, it had marked me, and it would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next delivery.